Have you ever paused for a moment and realized that every morning you wake up not because you want to, but because you have to? We trade hours of our lives for pieces of paper called money, and we tell ourselves it's normal. That's just how the world works. But what if I told you the rich don't work for money? Money works for them. Sounds like a paradox, doesn't it? Yet it's the quiet truth behind every person who has ever escaped the rat race. Welcome to Audiobook Gold, where awareness meets wisdom, a place for those who want to understand not just how to earn more, but how to live free. So let me ask you, what if your job isn't really giving you freedom, but quietly taking it away? In today's story, we'll uncover a mindset shift so powerful that once you see it, you'll never look at work or money the same way again. Because freedom isn't about how much you make. It's about who truly owns your time. There's a man I used to know. He wasn't poor, but he wasn't free either. Every morning, he woke up before the sun, quietly slipping out of bed so his wife could sleep a few more minutes. The coffee maker clicked on. Steam rose from the mug. He would stare at it for a moment before rushing to the same office he had gone to for almost 15 years. His name could be Michael or David, or maybe it could be you. He wasn't miserable. He had a good job, decent pay, a small house, a used car, and a savings account that never seemed to grow. But something about his life felt fragile, as if missing one paycheck could make the entire picture collapse. Every month, the numbers came and went. Salary in, bills out, rent, groceries, credit card, utilities, and somewhere in between, a quiet sigh. The sigh of someone who had learned to survive, but forgotten what it felt like to live. He once told me, if I just get promoted this year, I'll finally feel secure. But when the promotion came, the workload doubled, the stress tripled, and the extra money, well, it disappeared faster than he expected. New clothes, a better phone, dinners to celebrate. It was like pouring water into a bucket full of holes. That's when it hit him. He wasn't working to build a life. He was working to maintain a lifestyle. And that lifestyle had quietly become his cage. For years, he believed hard work was the answer, that diligence and discipline would somehow lead to freedom. It's what we were all taught, wasn't it? Study hard, work hard, climb the ladder. But no one ever said where the ladder actually leads. One night, after another long day at the office, Michael came home late. His little girl was already asleep, clutching the drawing she had made for him. A stick-figure family, hand in hand, smiling under a yellow sun. He stood there quietly, realizing he hadn't seen her awake for 3 days in a row. He touched the drawing, and for the first time in years, he asked himself a dangerous question. Is this it? Is this what life is supposed to be? That single question changed everything. He started to notice the people around him, all running on the same treadmill. Different faces, same pattern, working harder, earning more. Yet somehow, always short on time, always tired, always waiting for someday. And then, one afternoon, while waiting for his coffee at a local cafe, he overheard two men talking at the next table. One of them said something that would stay with him forever. If your money doesn't work while you sleep, you'll work until you die. Michael froze. It sounded arrogant at first, maybe even cruel, but it was true, painfully true. He began to read, to learn, not about investing or stock markets at first, but about mindsets. He discovered that people who became wealthy didn't simply earn more. They thought differently about money. To them, money wasn't something you chase. It was something you designed to move on its own. It was a servant, not a master. You see, most of us were raised to be good workers, not wise creators. We were taught how to earn, not how to grow. We know how to spend, but not how to multiply. Think about it. How many people you know can work tirelessly for years, yet panic if they miss one paycheck? How many celebrate a bonus with a new purchase instead of building a new stream of income? We've mistaken movement for progress and effort for success. Michael began to journal. Each night he'd write a single question at the top of the page. What did I build today that can earn for me tomorrow? At first, the answer was always nothing, but slowly the silence of that word began to sting. He started small. He read a book on personal finance. He canceled a subscription he didn't need. He saved the extra $50 not because it was much, but because it was a symbol, a reminder that he was regaining control. Then, he invested in something even more powerful than money: knowledge. He spent weekends learning about assets, liabilities, and cash flow. He discovered that rich people didn't necessarily have higher salaries. They simply owned systems that generated income without their constant effort. One line from a book stuck with him: "Poor people work for money. Rich people make money work for them." At first, it sounded cliché, but the more he studied, the clearer it became. When you trade your time for money, you set a limit: 24 hours, no more. But when you build assets, a business, an investment, a skill that creates value, you set money free to earn beyond those hours. That's when Michael realized he had never built anything that could exist without him. He was his only asset, and that's the most fragile business model in the world. He thought about his father, who worked every day of his life, retired at 65, and passed away just 2 years later. Hard-working, honest, loved by everyone, but always tired, always worrying about bills. And Michael whispered to himself, "I don't want that to be my story." From that night on, he made a quiet promise. He would never again trade his entire life just to make a living. He began treating money like an employee. Every dollar that came in, he'd ask, "What job can I give this?" If a dollar was idle, he'd assign it work. Maybe to buy a book that would teach him something. Maybe to start a side project that could grow. It wasn't easy. There were failures. He lost money on his first investment, made mistakes, got scared, even considered quitting. But he kept reminding himself of one truth: security doesn't come from working harder. It comes from thinking smarter. Gradually, his relationship with money changed. He stopped chasing more and started building multipliers. He began to feel lighter, not because he suddenly became rich, but because he understood what freedom truly meant. Freedom isn't a number in your bank account. It's waking up one day and realizing your time finally belongs to you. And here's the thing most people miss: you don't need millions to start feeling free. You just need to stop spending every penny you earn. You need to create a small space, a margin where your money can breathe, move, and grow. Michael's first small victory came the day his investment earned him $5 while he slept. It was such a small amount that most people would have ignored it. But for him, it was everything. Because for the first time in his life, money had worked while he rested. He realized then the real goal was never to quit working. It was to choose work that mattered, while money quietly supported the dream. Every story of transformation begins with awareness, and awareness often feels uncomfortable at first, like realizing you've been running on a treadmill for years. But that discomfort is also the beginning of freedom. Over time, Michael's habits evolved. He stopped measuring success by how busy his calendar looked. He started asking different questions. How much peace did I create this week? How many things did I build that can grow without me? How much time did I spend on what truly matters? And slowly, the numbers began to change, not just in his bank account, but in his heart. He had more space, more calm. He laughed more with his daughter. He began to live life on his own rhythm. Years later, when people asked him the secret, he smiled and said, "I stopped being an employee of money. I became its employer." But perhaps the most beautiful part of his story isn't how much he earned. It's how much he learned. That wealth isn't about accumulation, but alignment. When what you earn, what you value, and what you love all point in the same direction, that's true abundance. You might be listening to this and thinking, "Sure, that's easy for him to say. I don't have the time or the resources or the knowledge." And maybe that's true, for now. But remember this: every person who became financially free started exactly where you are, overwhelmed, uncertain, and just a little bit curious. The difference is that they chose to learn instead of complain, to act instead of postpone, to build instead of just earn. It's not about being lucky, it's about being intentional. Money doesn't have emotions. It doesn't love or hate you, but it does obey rules. And when you understand those rules, you stop chasing and start directing. You stop being a worker and become a creator. So tonight, as you listen to this story, maybe ask yourself, if tomorrow you couldn't work, how long could your current life sustain itself? Would your money continue to work for you? Or would everything stop the moment you do? That's the real measure of freedom. Because true wealth isn't built in numbers. It's built in systems. Quiet, invisible, consistent systems that keep working even when you rest. And the starting point is not a big investment. It's a small decision, a decision to stop living on autopilot, to stop believing that hard work alone is enough, to start seeing money as a tool, not a goal. Michael's story isn't unique. It's the story of millions who wake up one day and realize they've been climbing the wrong mountain, one built on effort, not ownership. But when you climb down and start over, you discover something powerful. The view from freedom is worth every step. So, if you're still selling your time, if you're still waiting for the perfect moment to start investing, pause. Look at the world around you. The sun rises without your permission. The trees grow without your effort. Nature multiplies effortlessly, and money can do the same. You just have to stop being afraid to let it. And maybe tonight, as you close your eyes, you'll remember this. You don't have to be rich to start thinking like the rich. You just have to stop living like money owns you. Because freedom doesn't begin in your wallet, it begins in your mind. And that, my friend, is where the real story begins. For most of his life, Michael believed what almost everyone believes, that working harder was the path to a better life. It's what schools teach, what parents repeat, and what society rewards. But one morning, as he walked to work with the same coffee, the same tired eyes, and the same silent commute, a quiet thought crossed his mind. If hard work alone made people rich, wouldn't the hardest workers be the wealthiest? He looked around, the street cleaner pushing his cart under the morning sun, the delivery man rushing to meet a deadline, the nurse leaving her night shift, exhausted yet smiling politely. These were good people, honest people, and yet none of them were free. The truth hit him like a whisper he had ignored for years. Hard work doesn't guarantee freedom, it guarantees exhaustion. That realization became his first real awakening, the first layer of illusion peeling away. We've been conditioned to think of money as something we must chase. It's almost poetic. We call it earning a living, as if life itself must be bought, hour by hour. But here's the quiet truth most people never pause to see. Money is not the goal. It's a reflection. It reflects how much value you create, how effectively you use systems, and how deeply you understand leverage, not labor. Michael started to study people who were truly wealthy, not just rich in possessions, but rich in time. He found patterns that repeated like hidden codes. They didn't measure success by income. They measured it by autonomy. They didn't ask, how much can I earn this month? They asked, what can I build that will keep earning when I'm not here? That shift, from earning to building, was the invisible line separating the free from the trapped. He remembered watching an interview with Warren Buffett. A journalist asked, "You're one of the richest men in the world. What's the key to your wealth?" Buffett smiled and said, "While I sleep, my money works." That one line stayed with him for weeks. He started writing it everywhere, on sticky notes, notebooks, even the wallpaper of his phone. Not because it sounded motivational, but because it carried a truth that felt almost spiritual. The real power isn't in what you do. It's in what continues after you stop doing. Think about that for a moment. Most people's income ends the second they rest, but the wealthy have designed systems that never sleep. Businesses, investments, royalties, digital products, skills that multiply value without their constant presence. They understood something profound. Leverage is the new labor. Michael once believed he needed a second job to make more money. Now he realized he needed a second system, so he began small, helping a local shop build a simple online store. He didn't earn much from it, but what he gained was priceless. The understanding that value scales through systems, not sweat. He began to see the world differently. Everywhere he looked, he noticed two types of people: those who consume systems and those who create them. When you scroll through social media, someone is earning from your attention. When you buy something online, someone is earning while they sleep. When you watch a video, someone's system is quietly working in the background. The difference between the rich and the rest isn't always intelligence, it's awareness. They see what others ignore. They build what others use. They design the game instead of playing it endlessly. But this truth comes with discomfort because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Michael started to feel uneasy at work, not because he hated his job, but because he realized it wasn't building anything for him. He was constructing someone else's dream. Every hour he worked, he was feeding a machine, but not one he owned. And that's when he understood the hidden equation of wealth. Employees build the system. Owners design the system. Investors fund the system. And the wealthy, they create systems that outlive them. He wrote in his journal that night, "I've been a good worker all my life. It's time to become a good builder." That sentence marked the beginning of a new chapter, not in his job, but in his mind. Still, the transition wasn't easy. When he talked to friends about his new insights, they laughed. "Come on, man," one said. "We're not Warren Buffett. We just need to survive." Another said, "I don't have time to think about systems. I'm too busy working." And that's when Michael realized another truth, perhaps the most painful of all. Most people are too busy earning a living to design a life. He didn't blame them. He had been one of them for decades. But once you awaken to a deeper awareness, returning to sleep becomes impossible. So, he began to study not just the wealthy, but the mindset of wealth. He noticed how they spoke differently, how they used language that reflected ownership, not obligation. They said things like, "I let my capital work," or "my portfolio generated this month," instead of "I made this much." Language reveals mindset, and mindset shapes destiny. One evening, he sat at a park watching the sunset. He noticed an older man sitting on a bench nearby, feeding pigeons. The man wore simple clothes, looked calm, almost serene. They started talking. Turns out the man had retired years ago. He had built a small business decades earlier, sold it, and now lived on the returns from his investments. He wasn't flashy, not rich by social media standards, but he had something far more precious: peace. Michael asked him, "How did you do it? How did you reach this place of calm?" The man smiled, eyes soft. "I learned early that if you don't make money your student, it'll make you its slave." That sentence felt like lightning. He had heard variations of it before, but never from someone so ordinary, so grounded. The man continued, "I wasn't smarter than anyone else. I just stopped wasting everything I earned. I let small sums grow. I built slowly. And one day, I realized my money had learned to work harder than I ever could." He paused, then said something Michael would never forget. "You can't buy freedom. You have to build it, one smart choice at a time." That night, as Michael drove home, he didn't feel envy or regret. He felt clarity, a new kind of calm awareness. For years, he had thought the game of money was about earning more. Now he understood. It was about directing what you earn towards something that multiplies without you. He no longer wanted a raise. He wanted results. He didn't want to make more income. He wanted to build more impact. That's when the true nature of wealth became visible to him. Freedom is not a destination. It's a skill of seeing beyond effort, a skill of creating flow, a skill of making money serve purpose, not ego. He started to share this insight quietly with others. Some listened, most didn't. But one woman, a co-worker named Anna, asked him one day, "What do you mean by money working for you? Isn't that just for investors?" Michael smiled. "No, it's for anyone who stops treating money like a guest and starts treating it like a worker." She looked puzzled. He explained, "When money comes in, you have a choice. You can spend it, or you can assign it work. Let it learn, grow, and produce. Every dollar is like a seed. If you eat it, it's gone. If you plant it, it multiplies." Anna thought for a moment, then said, "So you're saying wealth is about stewardship, not status?" He nodded. "That's the hidden truth no one talks about." From that day, Michael's journal entries became more intentional. He began writing down not just numbers, but lessons. He noticed that the wealthiest people weren't chasing money. They were chasing control. Control over time, control over decisions, control over what mattered most to them. They valued choice more than currency. And ironically, that's why money kept flowing to them, because money always moves toward clarity and confidence. There's a line from an old book that Michael loved. To those who manage well, even little will be multiplied. To those who waste, even abundance will vanish. It wasn't just about religion or philosophy. It was a truth about energy. Money, like energy, flows where it's respected. And respect begins with awareness. When you start to treat every dollar as potential, when you stop spending emotionally and start investing intentionally, you begin to rewrite your story. The hidden truth is simple but not easy. Money is not your master, it's your mirror. It reflects your habits, your fears, and your understanding. If you see scarcity, it's because your thoughts are scarce. If you see abundance, it's because your awareness has expanded. Freedom begins when you stop asking, "How much can I make?" and start asking, "How can I make this money multiply?" That question alone can shift your entire life because it forces you to think beyond the present, to design the future instead of reacting to it. Months later, Michael's life looked the same from the outside. Same car, same house, same job. But inside, everything had changed. He no longer worked for money, he worked with it. He saw opportunities everywhere, not just in markets, but in moments. He learned that money loves movement, and stagnation is the enemy of growth. He once feared losing money. Now he feared losing time, because he had learned time is the only asset that never regenerates. And perhaps that's the ultimate hidden truth. You can always make more money. You can never make more time. So the real purpose of wealth isn't to escape work. It's to buy back your time and use it on what truly matters. Family, growth, peace, creation, contribution. When you use money to reclaim your time, money transforms from a burden into a blessing. It becomes a silent ally on your path toward purpose. That's what the rich understand, and what most people sadly never learn. So tonight, remember this: hard work builds a living. Smart work builds a life. Don't just chase the paycheck. Design the system. Don't just save what's left. Invest in what lasts. Because the moment your money begins to move without you, you'll finally understand what freedom truly feels like. And when that happens, you'll look back and realize the truth was never hidden at all. It was waiting for you to stop running long enough to see it. There comes a moment in every awakening when knowledge is no longer enough, when the truth you've discovered demands to be lived, not just admired. For Michael, that moment came quietly, almost invisibly. It wasn't a grand event. It was a morning like any other. Gray sky, cool air, the faint hum of the city. But that day, as he poured his coffee, something inside him whispered, "If not now, then when?" He stared at his reflection in the dark surface of the coffee mug. He didn't see exhaustion anymore. He saw hesitation, and the man who was finally ready to end it. For years, he had told himself that one day, when things were stable, when he had enough savings, when the timing was right, he would finally start his own path. But the truth is, someday is where dreams go to die. And Michael realized that fear had been disguised as logic. He had been calling it responsibility, but in truth, it was just comfort wearing a serious face. That morning, he made a decision. Not loud, not impulsive, but quiet and absolute. He would begin. No matter how small, no matter how imperfect, he would start building his own system. The first steps were humble. He woke up an hour earlier each day, not to scroll, not to rush, but to learn. He studied online, listened to podcasts, read biographies of self-made people who started with nothing but courage and curiosity. He discovered that success wasn't about talent or timing. It was about compounding small decisions over time. Just as money compounds when invested, so does discipline, so does learning, so does courage. And each morning, as he worked quietly in the dawn stillness, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: aliveness. At first, the progress was invisible. He built a small digital project on weekends, a simple blog sharing lessons about money, mindset, and freedom. He didn't expect anyone to read it, but he needed a place to articulate what he was learning, to turn insight into impact. Weeks passed, then months. Slowly, people began to find his words. A few comments here and there. "This changed how I think. Thank you for writing this." Those small messages lit a quiet fire inside him. he realized something profound. When you begin to share what you learn, you multiply its power. That was the turning point, the moment he stopped chasing success and started serving through understanding. But transformation is never a straight path. With progress came resistance. Old habits returned. Doubt whispered again, this time more cunning than before. What if you fail? What if this is just a phase? What if you're not meant for more? The mind, when threatened by change, becomes its own worst enemy. But Michael had learned something powerful. Doubt doesn't mean you're on the wrong path. It means you've left the old one. So he didn't fight the fear. He observed it, the same way one watches a storm from inside a safe room, knowing it will pass. One evening, after a long day at work, he sat on his balcony watching the city lights. He saw thousands of windows glowing, each one holding a life, a story, a struggle. And for the first time, he didn't feel small. He felt connected. He realized that everyone in some way was trapped between comfort and calling. Some never escaped. Some tried and gave up. But a few, the rare few, kept walking through the fog, guided only by the small flame of belief. He wanted to be one of them. That night, he wrote in his journal, "I don't need to know the whole path. I just need to take the next step." Days turned into weeks. He learned to manage time differently. Instead of watching, he created. Instead of consuming, he contributed. He built his first small product, a short online course about personal finance, using all the lessons he had lived. He priced it modestly, almost shyly. To his surprise, people bought it. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. That first sale changed everything. Not the money. It was barely enough to buy dinner, but the meaning. Because for the first time, he had earned income from something that came from his mind, not his manager. It was the proof he needed. The system works, if you do. That night, he couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. Not the sale, but the feeling. Freedom didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like quiet relief. It felt like truth settling gently in the soul. He whispered to himself, This is how it begins." As months passed, his side project grew slowly but steadily. He wasn't getting rich overnight, but he was getting free by degrees. Every hour he spent building was an hour invested, not wasted. And every lesson learned made him stronger, sharper, more alive. But with growth came a new challenge: balance. His full-time job demanded energy. His side business demanded faith. He often found himself torn between stability and freedom. One night, exhausted, he almost quit. He shut his laptop and said, "Maybe I'm just not built for this." But then he saw the notebook where he had written months ago. If hard work made people rich, the world would look different. He smiled, because now he understood. The goal wasn't to escape hard work, but to redirect it toward purpose. And that realization reignited his fire. He began to treat every challenge as training, every failure as data, every delay as preparation. Instead of saying, "Why is this happening to me?" he started asking, "What is this teaching me?" That single question changed his life. Because when you stop seeing obstacles as punishment, you start seeing them as instruction. And when life becomes a classroom, every pain becomes progress. A year passed. Michael's world looked the same on the outside, but within, he had evolved into someone unrecognizable, patient, grounded, quietly powerful. He had built his first digital asset, a system that earned modestly while he slept. It wasn't a fortune, but it was proof of possibility. That small stream of income wasn't just money, it was momentum. And momentum is the most powerful currency of transformation. He realized something beautiful. Success isn't a destination, it's a direction, a slow unfolding of who you're meant to become. One weekend, he visited his parents. They still thought he was just working. He hadn't told them much about his side journey, afraid they'd worry or dismiss it. But that evening, as they sat together in the garden, his father asked, "Son, you seem calmer lately, happier even. What changed?" Michael smiled softly. "I stopped working for security. I started building with purpose." His father looked puzzled, so he explained, gently, humbly, how he'd learned to make money work, how he'd found meaning in creating instead of consuming, and how peace had replaced the old rush for more. When he finished, his father nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "I wish someone had told me that when I was your age," he said. Michael placed a hand on his father's shoulder and replied, "You just did." That night, as he drove home, he felt tears in his eyes, not of sadness, but of gratitude. He realized that transformation isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before fear taught you smallness. And that's when he understood the deeper truth. Freedom isn't built by knowledge alone. It's built by alignment, when your actions finally match your awareness. That is the turning point of every human journey, when wisdom leaves the mind and enters the soul. Over the following months, Michael continued building, not just systems, but identity. He stopped introducing himself by his job title. He started saying, "I build things that help people." That small shift changed how others saw him and how he saw himself. He learned that the world doesn't respond to what you say. It responds to what you believe. And belief, once anchored in truth, becomes magnetic. Opportunities began to appear. Collaborations, mentorships, new clients. Each one felt less like luck and more like alignment, because once you walk in clarity, the world rearranges to meet you. And so, the man who once lived in quiet frustration was now living in quiet power. He still worked hard, but it was a different kind of hard. Not draining, but devoted. Not fearful, but faithful. He no longer asked, "How long until I'm free?" He asked, "How deeply can I serve through what I build?" That question changed everything. Because when your purpose expands, your problems shrink. When you build not to escape life, but to express it, the journey itself becomes the reward. And maybe that's what true turning points look like. Not fireworks, not applause, but the quiet moment when your soul finally whispers, "Yes, this is who I was meant to be." Michael looked at his reflection one last time that night. Same mirror, same eyes, but a different man. He smiled, whispered softly, "I no longer chase freedom. I live it, one decision at a time." And in that stillness, under the hum of the sleeping city, he realized the turning point had already happened, not outside, but within. Freedom, Michael learned, isn't an event. It's a practice, a daily discipline, invisible to most, yet life-changing to those who choose it. For the first time in years, he didn't wake up with dread, he woke up with direction. And that made all the difference. Each morning, as sunlight filtered through his small apartment window, he would sit at his desk with a notebook and whisper to himself, "I am building systems, not moments." That line became his compass, a reminder that wealth is not built from sudden luck, but from small, repeated choices that quietly stack upon each other. 1. The first rule, pay yourself first. It sounded simple, almost too simple, but the greatest truths often are. Michael began setting aside a fixed portion of his income the moment it arrived, not after expenses, not after comfort, but before everything else. At first, it was barely noticeable, just 10%, tucked away automatically. But something subtle happened. He began to feel in control. It wasn't about the amount. It was about the message. Each transfer said, "I matter enough to invest in myself first." And slowly, as weeks turned into months, that account, once empty, became a quiet symbol of self-respect. He realized that money, like people, responds to how you treat it. When you ignore it, it abandons you. When you respect it, it stays and grows. 2. The second rule, make money while you sleep. It sounded like a fantasy once. Now it was a principle he could no longer ignore. He remembered a quote from Warren Buffett, "If you don't find a way to make money while you sleep, you'll work until you die." That line echoed through him like a bell. So he began to build assets, small, digital, self-sustaining systems that could earn even in his absence. He created digital guides, automated his online courses, and learned the art of setting up simple marketing flows that worked quietly in the background. The first few months were rough. He made mistakes, technical errors, bad pricing, poor copywriting, but he persisted, adjusting, refining, learning. And one night, he received a notification while sleeping. "You made a sale." It wasn't much, a few dollars, but it was the first proof that time could be multiplied. He laughed quietly in the dark, not because of the money, but because he realized he was no longer chained to the clock. 3. The third rule: invest in what you understand. The world of investment had always felt like another planet to him. Stocks, crypto, real estate, all those big words that seem meant for other people. But now he approached it differently. With curiosity, not fear. He read slowly, listened deeply, experimented modestly. He didn't chase hype or trends. He invested in learning first. He took small positions in areas he genuinely understood. He viewed every dollar as a seed, not a gamble. Some seeds failed, some grew, but every experience paid in wisdom. Over time, he realized something profound. True investing isn't about predicting the future, it's about preparing for it. And the best investment is always the one that multiplies your capacity to think clearly. 4. The fourth rule: assets over appearance. Michael used to buy things to feel successful. A new phone, a watch, a brand that whispered, "You've made it." But he began to notice a pattern. Each purchase gave a momentary high, followed by quiet emptiness. So he reversed the formula. Before buying anything new, he'd ask, "Will this make me look rich or be rich?" That single question became his filter. He started valuing invisible wealth, things others couldn't see but changed everything: skills, networks, ownership, systems. And life began to simplify. His space was cleaner, his mind clearer, his money more meaningful. Because wealth isn't measured by what you display, but by what you can sustain without fear. 5. The fifth rule: compound everything. Michael had once believed compounding only applied to money. Now he knew it applied to everything. Knowledge compounds, discipline compounds, trust compounds, even kindness compounds, every action returning multiplied in time. He created what he called the 1% rule. Do one small thing every day that improves life by just 1%. 1 page read, $1 invested, 1 thoughtful message sent. Individually, they looked insignificant, but after a year, his world was unrecognizable. He often smiled, thinking, it wasn't one big move, it was 1,000 quiet ones. The quiet transformation. Over time, the changes rippled outward. He noticed how differently he walked, spoke, and even breathed. The tension that once lived in his chest began to fade. He wasn't chasing money anymore. He was building alignment. Each action had intention. Each day felt like a vote for the person he wanted to become. And life, in its mysterious kindness, began to respond. He was offered a new project at work, something creative, something that used his unique skills. Not because he begged for it, but because people could feel his energy shift. When you start acting from purpose, the world starts to notice. The golden lesson. One afternoon, he was writing in his journal and paused to summarize what he'd learned. He wrote just one sentence: "The rich are not special, they're strategic." He stared at the words for a long moment. It was so simple, yet so piercingly true. Success wasn't reserved for a few. It was available to anyone willing to build systems instead of excuses. He realized wealth wasn't a mystery. It was a mindset, a slow mastery of how energy flows through value, money, meaning, and multiplication. Michael began teaching others informally, friends, coworkers, anyone who asked. He never called himself a guru. He was simply sharing what had worked. And in teaching, he discovered another secret. The fastest way to grow is to give. When you share your lessons, you deepen your understanding. When you lift others, you rise higher yourself. He began hosting small online sessions, guiding others to design their own financial freedom maps. People resonated with his warmth, his honesty. He wasn't flashy, he was real. And that authenticity built something money couldn't buy: trust. Trust became his brand, service became his strategy, and abundance became a byproduct, not a pursuit. The shift in perspective. One evening, while journaling under dim lamplight, he realized something that made him tear up quietly. For so long he had asked, "How can I make more money?" But now the question had changed. How can I make more meaning and let the money follow? That single shift changed his entire world, because money is only powerful when it serves purpose. Without it, it becomes noise, endless chasing, empty winning. He understood now, the real wealth is not in the bank. It's in the balance between ambition and peace. The practice of quiet richness, Michael began designing his life differently. He no longer measured days by productivity, but by presence. He still worked hard, but without the panic. He allowed himself slow mornings, deep conversations, walks at sunset. And curiously, the more peaceful he became, the more creative ideas flowed. It was as if silence had unlocked abundance. He noticed that all the richest people he admired shared one common trait. They valued time above all else, because time is the only currency that can never be earned back, and the only one that, when spent well, multiplies everything else. The humble formula. If he had to teach what he'd learned, it would fit in one short formula. Earn actively, build skills, trade value for income, save intentionally, protect your energy and money from waste. Invest wisely, make your earnings multiply through learning and ownership. Create passively, build systems that work without you. Give freely, turn wealth into impact, because that's what keeps it alive. He realized that this wasn't just a path to money, it was a path to maturity, to living consciously, to becoming the kind of person who doesn't chase wealth, but attracts it naturally. A whisper to his younger self. One night, he imagined speaking to his younger self, the man who once lived paycheck to paycheck, exhausted and afraid. He whispered softly, "You don't need to be perfect. You just need to begin. Wealth is not about working harder. It's about working smarter for yourself. Don't wait for confidence. Build it through action." And if that younger version of him could hear, he'd probably smile, unsure but hopeful. Because the journey from survival to freedom always begins with one belief, that you are capable of more than earning a wage. The golden reminder. As the night deepened, Michael closed his journal and whispered one last thought. People chase money because they fear time, but the wise create systems because they respect it. He leaned back, looked out at the sleeping city, and smiled. He finally understood the secret that had eluded him all these years. The goal was never to own more things. It was to own himself. And that was the truest form of wealth. The first time Ethan saw the numbers move on his screen, not because he worked, but because his money worked, he didn't celebrate. He just stared. It was late, almost midnight. The city outside had gone quiet, the kind of silence that only appears when everyone else has gone to sleep chasing tomorrow. But Ethan, he was awake, watching his today transform. The small investment he made months ago, a simple, careful choice, had begun to grow, slowly, quietly, without his hands touching it. No boss, no deadlines, no alarm clocks, just growth. He realized something profound that night. Money isn't earned, it's managed, it's directed. It's like a river. If you build the channels right, it flows toward you. If you ignore it, it disappears into the ground. For years, he had been the man standing in that river, trying to grab handfuls of water, scooping, splashing, exhausting himself just to hold on to something that would always slip away. But now, he was building dams, canals, and streams, guiding it, controlling it, multiplying it, and it changed something inside him. He no longer checked his phone for salary notifications. He checked his investments, his projects, his ideas, the things that worked while he slept. For the first time, he didn't feel tired. He felt alive. But freedom, he soon learned, doesn't come with a single victory. It's not about the day your money starts working for you. It's about the day your mind stops depending on the old ways of survival. Because freedom isn't a bank balance. It's a mindset. The next morning, Ethan went back to his small coffee shop on the corner. It was the same place where he had once sat for hours, staring out the window, wondering if life was supposed to be just work, sleep, repeat. The barista still greeted him with a tired smile. The same song played from the old speakers. Nothing had changed, except him. He looked around and saw the invisible chains that bound everyone there. The man in a suit scrolling through emails before the office opened. The young woman tapping away on her laptop, freelancing to pay rent. The old couple whispering about bills and medicine. Ethan felt something between empathy and urgency. He wanted to tell them what he had learned, that wealth isn't about money, it's about options. That time is the only true currency, that they could all be free, if only they stopped believing they couldn't. But he also knew, no one listens to advice they're not ready to hear. They have to feel the weight before they crave the wings. So he simply smiled, paid for his coffee, and left a tip larger than usual, not to show off, but as a quiet symbol to himself. I have enough, and I am no longer afraid. That evening, he sat on the balcony, watching the sunset spill gold across the buildings. The air carried that subtle scent of rain and smoke, a reminder of how fragile life is, how quickly everything can change. He thought about his father, the man who had spent 40 years at the same job, saving, waiting for retirement, only to pass away before he could spend a single peaceful year. He thought about his younger self, the boy who once believed hard work alone was the answer. And he whispered to the wind, I get it now. It was never about working harder. It was about understanding the game. He had spent his whole life playing checkers, while the rich were playing chess, thinking 10 moves ahead, building leverage, making the board work for them. That realization wasn't bitter, it was liberating, because once you see the board, you can change how you play. Weeks passed. Ethan's life grew quieter, simpler, lighter. He didn't chase more. He learned to manage better. He started mentoring a few people online, sharing what he knew, not as a guru, but as a friend. He told stories, not strategies. He taught principles, not secrets. One message kept echoing through his words. Freedom isn't about quitting your job. It's about knowing you could, and still choosing what brings you peace. He spoke of balance. He spoke of control. He spoke of the peace that comes when your days are no longer sold by the hour. And people listened, not because he promised wealth, but because his voice carried truth, the kind you only earn by living it. One night, a message arrived in his inbox. It was from a young man named Lucas. He wrote, I've been listening to your stories. I'm tired of chasing a paycheck that never lasts, but I don't know where to start. How do you even begin to make money work for you? Ethan smiled. He saw himself in that message. The confusion, the yearning, the quiet desperation. He typed back, You start by changing the question. Don't ask how to make money work for you. Ask how to make your time valuable enough that money follows. He paused, then continued, Learn a skill that scales. Build something once that can serve others many times. And when you earn, don't spend to look rich. Invest to stay free. He hit send. Then he sat back, letting the hum of the night fill the room. That single message, honest, simple, felt like passing a torch. Because knowledge once shared multiplies, just like money, just like freedom. Ethan closed his laptop and stepped outside. The sky above was scattered with stars, each one a quiet symbol of how small we are, yet how vast our potential can be. He thought about the millions of people still trapped in the cycle he'd escaped, the endless loop of earn, spend, repeat. He knew not everyone would break free, but maybe, just maybe, one listener at a time, a few would begin to question the system. And questioning, he realized, is where every revolution begins. He whispered softly, For years I sold my time to survive. Now I use my time to create. That's the real difference. The night breeze carried his words away, a gentle promise to anyone who would one day hear them. Because in the end, freedom isn't about money in the bank. It's about waking up one morning, knowing you could stop working, and your life wouldn't fall apart. It's about having space to breathe, to think, to choose, to spend time with people you love, doing what matters, not what you're paid for. It's about replacing the question, how much can I earn, with how much can I live? And when that day finally comes, when your money, your time, and your purpose move in harmony, you'll understand what Ethan felt that night, alone by the window, watching numbers grow on their own. Not excitement, not greed, but peace. Pure quiet peace. Because the true goal was never to become rich. It was to become free. For a long time after Ethan had achieved what he once called freedom, life felt like a calm sea. No more storms of deadlines. No more sinking fear of losing his job. He had systems, investments, quiet income flowing through digital veins. Small, steady, enough. He'd finally escaped the noise. Or so he thought. But life, as it always does, has a way of testing the truths we claim to live by. Freedom isn't given, it's proven. And the test came, quietly, unexpectedly, like a tide turning. It started with a phone call, a trembling voice on the other side. Ethan, it's Mom. Her tone carried that fragile hesitation, the kind that holds bad news gently, hoping it hurts less when spoken softly. His father, the man who had taught him everything about hard work, had fallen ill, a sudden stroke, the kind that changes everything in one heartbeat. Ethan flew back to his hometown that same night. The drive from the airport to the hospital felt endless, past the same fields he once ran through as a child, past the old diner still glowing in the dark. The world looked the same, but he was seeing it with new eyes. Eyes that had finally understood the cost of time. When he reached the hospital room, his father lay there, silent, still, a machine tracing the rhythm that his body could no longer keep on its own. Ethan stood there, frozen, realizing something cruel. All the money he had built, all the freedom he had earned, none of it could buy this moment back. For 3 days, he barely slept. He sat by the bed, watching the monitors beep in steady defiance of death. Every sound in that room felt sacred, every breath a currency more precious than gold. He remembered the way his father used to come home from work, exhausted yet smiling, and how Ethan had once promised himself, "I'll make enough money so you'll never have to work again." But time had moved faster than love. He had built freedom for himself, too late for the man who inspired it. On the third night, when the doctors finally spoke the words he feared most, Ethan didn't cry. He just sat in silence, because grief, when mixed with guilt, doesn't scream. It sinks. The following weeks blurred together. Funeral arrangements, condolences, familiar faces saying unfamiliar things. The house felt smaller than he remembered. The walls carried echoes of laughter from years long gone. As he packed his father's old tools, he found a small notebook, worn, coffee-stained, edges curled with age. Inside were numbers, notes, little reminders scribbled in his father's neat handwriting. Save 10% no matter how small. Never owe what you can't pay. Always leave something better than you found it. And at the bottom of one page, a single line stood out, underlined twice. Freedom means being there when it matters. Ethan read that again and again, and then it hit him. His father had been free all along. Not financially, not materially, but in the way he showed up for people, in how he gave his time, his presence, his love, even when life gave him little in return. Ethan had chased a freedom of numbers, but his father had lived a freedom of heart. That realization broke him, and then it remade him. Days turned into weeks. Ethan stayed in his hometown longer than planned. He walked through old streets, met people he hadn't seen in years. Some still worked in the same factories. Some had opened small stores. Some just smiled through tired eyes and said, "You made it, huh?" But Ethan didn't feel like he'd made it. He felt like he'd been given a second chance to understand what life was really asking of him. Freedom, he realized, was not the destination. It was the beginning. Because once you're free from needing money, the next question is, now that you have your time back, what will you do with it? One afternoon, he visited the local community center. The roof leaked, the walls were cracked, but inside were kids, laughing, shouting, chasing dreams too big for their world. He talked to the director, an elderly woman named Clara. She said they were losing funding, that they might have to close by winter. Ethan didn't think twice. He asked how much they needed. She gave him a number, small compared to what he'd spent on his last vacation. He wrote a check, but as he handed it to her, she smiled and said, "You know, money helps, but what they really need is you." He didn't understand at first. Then he saw it. The way the children's eyes lit up when someone simply listened to them. The way they craved attention, not donations. Presence, not pity. So he started showing up, teaching small lessons about saving, about dreaming bigger, about believing they could. No cameras, no social media, just him and them. And for the first time, Ethan felt a new kind of wealth, one that didn't grow in accounts but in impact. Months passed. His father's notebook stayed on his desk, a quiet reminder that freedom has levels. The first level is escaping survival. The second is earning choice. The third, the rarest, is using your freedom to free others. And that was the test, because freedom that serves only you isn't freedom. It's just comfort disguised as victory. Ethan began funding small scholarships, helping single mothers learn basic finance, teaching people that they didn't have to be rich to be in control. He told them what his father's notebook had taught him. Freedom means being there when it matters. And every time he repeated those words, he felt his father alive again, not in memory, but in action. One night, as he closed his laptop, he noticed a message notification from Lucas again, the young man who'd written before. Ethan, I started building that small online business like you said. It's not much, but last week I made my first $100 while I slept. I used it to take my mom out for dinner. It wasn't about the money, it was the feeling. Thank you. Ethan smiled. He turned off the screen and looked up at the stars, each one a tiny light in the darkness, just like people waking up to a new way of living. He whispered softly, "That's how freedom grows. One person at a time." Later that year, on the anniversary of his father's passing, Ethan returned to that same coffee shop from years ago. Same barista, same music. But this time, he wasn't there to question his life. He was there to honor it. He ordered 2 coffees. He placed one across from him where his father would have sat. And he whispered, "I finally understand. Thank you for teaching me what real wealth looks like." The cup stayed untouched, steam rising like incense, fading into the cool air. Ethan smiled, because now freedom wasn't just something he had, it was something he shared. In that quiet moment, as the city lights shimmered like constellations below, he realized something deeper than any quote or formula could express. You don't build freedom by chasing money. You build it by aligning your values with your time. And when those two finally meet, that's wealth beyond measure. The true test of freedom isn't when you can afford anything. It's when you no longer need everything. And that night, sitting alone but not lonely, Ethan finally passed the test. Months drifted into seasons, and the rhythm of Ethan's days began to settle into something beautifully ordinary. He would wake with the sun, make coffee the way his father once did, and spend his mornings reading, writing, and walking. No alarms, no deadlines, just quiet purpose. His investments ticked steadily in the background, silent gears of a machine he had built years ago. But unlike before, he no longer checked them every day. He had stopped chasing numbers because somewhere along the way, he realized the real scoreboard of life wasn't measured in dollars, but in days fully lived. One morning, while sitting on a park bench near the lake, Ethan watched an old man feeding the birds, each handful of crumbs scattered across the water, each ripple expanding gently outward. Something about that moment stayed with him. The peace on the old man's face, the kind that only comes from someone who no longer wants more than what he already has. For years, Ethan had thought wealth meant having more, but now, watching the old man, he saw the truth. Real wealth was needing less. He remembered a line he once read, "The man who needs nothing is the richest man of all." And suddenly, it all made sense. Why the chase had felt so exhausting, why no number had ever been enough, why freedom had felt incomplete even after he made it. Because freedom was never about the money itself. It was about reclaiming your time, your peace, and your presence. And wealth was the art of using that freedom to create meaning. That afternoon, Ethan walked home with a thought echoing in his mind. If I died tomorrow, what would remain? He had enough assets to last several lifetimes, but he wondered, what had he truly built that would outlive him? Would people remember him for what he earned or for what he gave? That question led him to something he hadn't felt in years, a calling. Not the loud kind that shouts through ambition, but the quiet whisper that lives in the heart of purpose. He started writing again, not about investments or markets, but about the mindset of money. How people could change their relationship with it, how they could stop being slaves to the system, how they could learn to let their money breathe and grow while they lived. At first, he wrote just for himself, but soon others began to read, and then share, and then ask for more. Within a few months, his small essays turned into a collection of thoughts. A friend convinced him to publish them as a book. He hesitated, then smiled, because maybe this was the next chapter, not in his career, but in his contribution. When the book came out, it wasn't a bestseller overnight. It didn't need to be, but those who read it said it changed them. It wasn't about money. It was about meaning, about freedom that starts in the mind long before it ever shows up in the bank. He called it Time the Only Currency. In it, he wrote, "Money is a tool, time is a gift. Freedom is the bridge between them. The poor spend time to earn money. The rich spend money to earn time. The wise use both to create meaning." His words began to travel through podcasts, through classrooms, through quiet recommendations between friends. People started to write to him, not asking for advice, but to say thank you. One woman said she finally quit a job that drained her soul. Another said she started saving, not to get rich, but to breathe easier. A man wrote, "I stopped feeling guilty for resting. For the first time, I feel free." Each message was like a ripple. Small, gentle, but spreading farther than he could ever measure. As his message grew, Ethan began to mentor others, not as a guru, but as a guide who had walked through fire and found clarity on the other side. He taught one simple principle: make your money serve your life, not the other way around. He would tell them stories of his failures, his fears, his father's notebook, and the night he realized time was the most expensive thing he'd ever owned. People listened, not because he was rich, but because he was real, and that authenticity became his new kind of capital. It attracted those who were done with chasing illusions, those who wanted peace, not status. One evening, after a small seminar, a young woman approached him. She looked nervous but determined. She said, "I've been saving for years, but I'm scared to invest. What if I lose it all?" Ethan smiled softly and said, "You already are. Every day you wait out of fear, you lose the chance to grow. Money doesn't fear risk. People do." He paused, then added, "But remember, the goal isn't to have more money. It's to have more choices." She nodded slowly, and in that moment, he saw in her eyes what he had once lost, the spark of possibility. That night, Ethan sat alone again, under a sky wide and silent. He realized that all along, money had just been a mirror, reflecting who we are, not defining it. If we are restless, money amplifies our restlessness. If we are fearful, it multiplies our fear. If we are grateful, it expands our peace. We don't really chase money. We chase the feelings we think it will give us: security, validation, freedom. But those were never for sale. They were states of being, earned only by learning to live in alignment with what truly matters. And that became the essence of his lesson and of this chapter in his life. True wealth is not measured by how much money you have, but by how little your happiness depends on it. That line became the heartbeat of everything he did. It was printed on posters, quoted in talks, but to Ethan, it wasn't just words. It was truth earned by living. He had seen both sides, the grind that steals your soul and the silence that returns it. He had climbed to the top of ambition, only to find the summit was empty, until he looked down and saw the hands reaching up. In the years that followed, Ethan turned his focus entirely toward education. He started an initiative that taught financial literacy in schools, especially in low-income communities. He believed if people learned early that money was a tool, not a trap, they could build lives of choice instead of chasing. He poured his resources, time, and energy into it, and for the first time in his life, his work didn't feel like work. It felt like continuation. The legacy of his father's notebook had finally found its shape, not in wealth passed down, but in wisdom passed forward. Years later, as he stood before a room full of teenagers at one of his workshops, he held up the old notebook. "This," he said, "was my first lesson in freedom." He opened to the page with his father's handwriting. Freedom means being there when it matters. He looked up and said, "Money can buy you comfort, but only wisdom can buy you time. And time is the only thing you can never earn back." The room went silent. Somewhere, a single clap began, and soon, the entire room was standing. But Ethan didn't feel pride. He felt peace, the kind that whispers, "You've done what you came here to do." Later that night, he walked outside. The city lights flickered like stars, and he thought of his father again, the man who taught him work, and the lesson he had to live to understand. He whispered into the wind, "I kept your promise, Dad. I learned to let money work for me, so I could finally work for something greater." And as he stood there, hands in his pockets, heart full, he realized he hadn't just become wealthy, he had become whole. And that was the essence of wealth: to have enough to give, enough to live, and enough to sleep at night, knowing you are no longer working for money. You are working for meaning. There's a strange silence that comes after you finally see through the illusion, not the silence of peace, but the silence of awakening. It's the sound of your mind realizing how much of your life was spent chasing things that never truly belonged to you. The car you bought to look successful, the apartment you worked overtime for, the title you fought for in meetings that drained your soul. All those things once felt important. Now they feel empty. Ethan sat by the window that morning, coffee cooling beside him, as the city stretched awake beneath a pale dawn. He watched people rushing to work, the same rhythm he once followed without question. But this time, he didn't feel envy or pride. He just felt distance. There's something tragic and beautiful about watching others live the way you used to. It's like seeing your old reflection in a mirror that no longer belongs to you. He remembered a conversation with his mentor years ago. Freedom, the old man had said, isn't the moment you stop working. It's the moment you no longer need to prove anything. Back then, Ethan didn't understand. He thought freedom was money in the bank, assets that grew while he slept. But now, sitting in that quiet apartment, he realized freedom was actually clarity. Clarity of what truly matters. He used to fill every silence with sound. Podcasts about business, calls about deals, meetings about growth. The noise made him feel alive, relevant, part of something big. But the noise was also a disguise, a way to hide from the deeper truth that he was afraid to face. He didn't really know why he was doing any of it. Now the silence was heavy, yes, but it was also honest. He opened his notebook, the same one he had carried for years. The pages were full of financial plans, goals, projections, and notes on scaling income. He turned to a blank page and wrote only 3 words. What truly matters? It was a simple question, yet it carried the weight of everything he'd lived for. He thought about the people he loved but rarely saw, the moments he missed because he was too busy, the version of himself he left behind, the dreamer, the artist, the one who once painted and wrote without caring if it paid. For the first time in years, he felt tears press behind his eyes, not from regret, but from recognition. He wasn't angry at the world anymore. He wasn't even angry at himself. He was simply aware, that awareness we all arrive at too late, when the noise fades and the truth has nowhere else to hide. The truth was simple. He had been earning a living, but not living a life. Outside, a street musician started playing the violin. Soft, slow, the kind of melody that sounds like time passing. Ethan closed his eyes. The notes fell like drops of memory, and in them he saw his life not as a list of achievements, but as a series of choices. Every yes to one thing had been a no to something else. Every goal he chased came with a trade, usually his time. He realized suddenly and deeply that time was the real currency of freedom, not dollars, not investments, not status. Time. And every time he said, "I'll do it later," he was unknowingly spending the one currency he could never earn back. He took a deep breath. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like he was rushing anywhere. He didn't know exactly what he wanted to do next, but he knew what he no longer wanted. The endless race, the performance, the illusion. That knowledge alone felt like wealth. He smiled faintly. Maybe freedom wasn't a destination. Maybe it was a decision, renewed every day you choose to live with intention, not obligation. As the morning sun began to paint gold across his desk, Ethan whispered to himself, "Today I don't sell my time, I own it." He picked up his notebook again and turned the page. On the top, he wrote a new chapter title, The Silent Revolution. Because that's what it truly is, not a rebellion against the world, but against the noise within. The revolution of living simply, quietly, deliberately. He didn't need applause. He didn't need validation. He just needed to be fully present, fully free. And in that silence, the weight began to lift. Not all at once, but slowly, like fog rising from a valley after a long night. Freedom, he realized, isn't something you find at the end of a journey. It's something you create, one honest moment at a time. There's a kind of wealth the world doesn't talk about. It doesn't live in numbers or in portfolios or in the applause of others. It lives in quiet mornings, unhurried thoughts, and the simple joy of enough. Ethan woke up before dawn. No alarm, no rush, just the gentle hum of the city outside his window, the same city that once demanded everything from him. He poured a cup of coffee and sat on the balcony, watching the sky fade from blue to gold. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the need to check his phone. There were no urgent emails, no meetings waiting for him, no sense of running late. He had stopped measuring life by productivity. Now he measured it by presence. That's the quiet kind of wealth, when you can sit with yourself and feel at peace. He thought about how far he had come, not in terms of status or possessions, but in understanding. He used to think freedom meant having everything. Now he knew it meant needing less. The simplicity was disarming. He had fewer things, fewer plans, fewer expectations, and yet he felt richer than ever. The truth was, once he stopped chasing, life started arriving. He noticed little things again. The sound of rain on the balcony, the smell of freshly cut grass, the way sunlight touched old brick walls in the late afternoon. He realized these moments had always been there, waiting for him. He just had been too busy to see them. He remembered what his mentor had said years ago. Most people die with their calendars full and their hearts empty. That line used to sound poetic. Now it felt painfully true. He looked back at his old journals, plans for scaling, goals for growth, deadlines, KPIs. They felt like a language he no longer spoke. The new pages were different now, filled not with numbers but reflections. What he was learning, what he was letting go of, what he was quietly grateful for. He wrote, "I used to chase wealth to feel safe. Now I create space to feel alive." That was it, the shift. Not about control anymore, but surrender. Not about building walls of success, but finding windows of peace. He realized that the greatest return on investment wasn't money compounding. It was awareness deepening. He had learned to let time breathe again, to leave gaps in his day, to walk without a purpose, talk without an agenda, listen without waiting to reply. And strangely, the more he slowed down, the more life seemed to open up. Opportunities still came, but he no longer chased them. People still reached out, but he no longer needed to prove anything. He was no longer running from emptiness. He was resting inside it. That's the paradox of awakening. When you stop trying to fill your life, it finally begins to feel full. He took another sip of coffee, feeling the warmth on his hands. The city was alive again now. Cars, horns, footsteps. But it didn't feel like pressure anymore. It felt like music, like a rhythm he could choose to dance to, or simply watch. He smiled, realizing that he had become invisible in the best possible way. No longer performing, no longer seeking validation, just existing, fully. Wealth, he understood now, wasn't stored in banks. It was stored in moments, in laughter shared without agenda, in time spent without guilt, in peace that doesn't depend on a paycheck. He had learned that the ultimate luxury isn't something you can buy. It's waking up with nothing to escape from. He wrote one last line in his journal before closing it. "My life is quiet now, and that's how I know it's full." The wind moved through the open window, scattering the loose pages across the floor. He didn't rush to gather them. He just watched. Papers dancing, light shifting, time moving gently forward. There was no soundtrack, no audience, no finish line. Just this, the present, unfolding. And maybe that's what the rich never tell you, that true wealth is invisible. It's not loud. It doesn't demand attention. It simply is. It's the look in your eyes when you stop needing to be somewhere else. It's the breath you take without worry. It's the deep exhale that whispers, "I'm home." Ethan stood and looked out across the skyline one last time. The same buildings, the same streets, but a different man. He wasn't richer in the way the world measures it, but he had something rarer, the wealth of inner stillness. He had learned to own his time, his mind, and his peace. And in the end, that's the quiet kind of wealth the world will never understand, but the soul always recognizes. He smiled softly to himself. Then, almost as if to no one, he whispered, "Thank you for the noise. It helped me hear the silence." And with that, he closed his notebook. The story complete, but the journey just beginning.